Right, let's talk about something the big glossy motorcycle magazines never seem to cover. Every year we get bombarded with reviews of six-figure adventure bikes, race replica superbikes that'll bankrupt you before you've even bought a helmet, and cruisers so heavy you need a mate just to back them out of the garage. But here's a stat that might surprise you. Roughly 1 in 10 Australians holds a motorcycle license, and a huge chunk of them aren't riding anything at all. They've got the license sitting in their wallet next to their pension card, gathering dust. And a lot of those license holders? They're over 50, over 60, sometimes well into their 70s. They rode as young blokes and Sheilas back in the 70s and 80s. They gave it away when the kids came along, and now the kids have moved out, the mortgage is under control, and they're looking at that old license thinking, why not? The problem is, nobody's making content for them. It's all fastest bike under 30 grand or which leader bike has the most horsepower. Meanwhile, there's a whole world of light, cheap, forgiving, low-seat motorcycles that are absolutely perfect for someone getting back into riding later in life. Bikes that don't demand a chiropractor's appointment just to swing a leg over, don't cost as much as a small car, and won't have you white-knuckling the bars the second the throttle moves. So today we are counting down 15 of them. Real bikes, real Australian ride-away prices, and real reasons why they've quietly become the go-to choice for the over 50 crowd getting back on two wheels, even if you've never seen a single one of them reviewed on the telly. Before we jump in, it's worth understanding why this whole category even exists. The Australian new bike market has actually been easing off for a few years running now, with total motorcycle and off-road vehicle sales dipping slightly year on year as cost of living pressure bites into discretionary spending. But here's the interesting bit. While big road bikes have softened, scooters have been one of the very few segments still growing. That's not a coincidence. Affordable, low-stress, easy-to-ride machines are exactly what's keeping this industry ticking over, and a huge slice of that demand is coming from riders in their 50s, 60s, and beyond who are either returning after decades off the road or trying two wheels for the very first time in retirement. And there's a simple, practical reason these particular machines work so well for that crowd. It usually comes down to four things: seat height low enough to get both feet flat on the ground, weight light enough to walk the bike backwards out of a driveway without a struggle, a price tag that doesn't eat into the retirement fund, and control simple enough that a rusty clutch hand or a dodgy knee isn't going to catch you out at the worst possible moment. Every single bike on this list ticks at least 2 or 3 of those boxes, and several of them tick all 4. Let's get into it.
15. Vespa Sprint Tech 150.
We are kicking off the countdown with a bit of Italian flair. The Vespa Sprint Tech 150 sits at around $8,790 ride-away here in Australia, which puts it at the pricier end of today's list, but stick with me, because the reasons it's on here matter. For a returning rider who doesn't necessarily want to be rowing through gears with a clutch hand that isn't what it used to be, a proper twist-and-go automatic scooter is an enormous relief. No clutch lever, no gear lever, just twist the throttle and go, brake with both hands like a bicycle. The step-through frame means you're not throwing a leg high over a seat. You just step in, sit down, and you're riding. That's a genuinely big deal if hips or knees have started complaining. The Sprint's 150 cubic centimeters engine is plenty for suburban streets, shopping trips, and the odd Sunday coffee run. And because it's a proper steel-bodied Vespa rather than a plastic-paneled budget scooter, it holds its value and looks the part parked outside the local cafe. It's the bike that says, "I've still got style," without asking you to prove anything to anyone. There's also a practical side worth mentioning. Steel-bodied Vespas have historically held their resale value far better than budget plastic scooters, which matters if you're not entirely sure yet whether riding is going to become a regular habit or a passing curiosity. Buy smart, ride it for a year or two, and if it turns out two wheels aren't for you after all, you're not looking at a devastating loss when it comes time to sell. That's a comforting safety net for anyone dipping a toe back into motorcycling after a long break. 14. Royal Enfield Hunter 350. Coming in next is the Royal Enfield Hunter 350, ride-away pricing starting from around $7,590 to $7,990 depending on the dealer and the state you're in. Now, Royal Enfield has done something clever with this whole 350 platform, and the Hunter is the sportier, more agile end of that family. It's got a genuinely low center of gravity, a relaxed rake angle so the steering isn't twitchy, and a seat height that most riders, regardless of leg length, can get both feet flat on the ground with. That single fact, being able to plant both boots on the tarmac at the lights, does wonders for confidence when you're easing back into riding after a break of 20 or 30 years. It's also got that lovely, unhurried single-cylinder thump that doesn't feel like it's trying to catapult you into a fence the moment you touch the throttle. Power delivery is smooth and predictable, which is exactly what you want when your reflexes aren't quite what they were at 22. And because it's LAMS approved, if your license has lapsed and you're starting fresh on your restricted license, the Hunter is completely legal to ride. What really sets the Hunter apart from a lot of its rivals in this price bracket is how unintimidating it feels the moment you sit on it. There's no aggressive forward lean, no high peg placement forcing your knees into an awkward crouch. You sit upright, hands fall naturally to the bars, and the whole bike just feels approachable. Servicing costs and parts availability have also improved dramatically in Australia over the past few years as Royal Enfield's local dealer network has expanded, so the days of worrying about long waits for spares are largely behind us.
13. Vespa Primavera Tech 150.
Sliding in at 13 is the Vespa Primavera Tech 150, which you'll find priced from roughly $7,390 up to around $8,790 right away depending on the model year and dealer specials running at the time. The Primavera is essentially the Sprint's slightly more elegant, more classically curved sibling. Same 150 cubic centimeters single-cylinder engine, same twist-and-go simplicity, same step-through practicality. Where it differs is in the styling, rounder, softer, more of that classic 1960s Vespa silhouette that a lot of older riders remember fondly from their younger years, whether they rode one themselves or simply lusted after one from a footpath. There's something genuinely lovely about coming back to riding on a machine that looks almost exactly like the one you couldn't afford as a 19-year-old. And practically speaking, remote seat opening, LED lighting front and back, and a proper 8-litre fuel tank mean you're not constantly stopping for petrol on your Sunday loop. It's a scooter built for cruising, not for chasing lap times, which is exactly the point. The 12-inch wheels are worth a mention too, because they're noticeably larger than what you'll find on a lot of budget scooters, and that translates directly into more stability over Australia's less-than-perfect suburban road surfaces, potholes, tram tracks, uneven bitumen patches near roadworks. For an older rider who's understandably a little more cautious about sudden surprises underneath the wheels, that extra stability is worth every cent of the premium over a cheaper, smaller-wheeled alternative. 12. Royal Enfield Meteor 350. Number 12 is the bike that, in our humble opinion, doesn't get nearly enough credit. The Royal Enfield Meteor 350, with ride-away pricing starting from roughly $6,990. This is a proper cruiser in miniature. Relaxed rider triangle, forward set foot pegs, a seat that's low and scooped so you sink into it rather than perch on top of it, and enough torque down low that you're never hunting for revs in traffic. Royal Enfield even fits the Meteor with their Tripper navigation pod as standard, a simple turn-by-turn display that clips onto your phone via Bluetooth, so you're not fumbling with a phone mount taped to your handlebars. For an older rider who always fancied a cruiser but never wanted the bulk, the weight, or the price tag of a Harley-Davidson, the Meteor 350 is the answer nobody's shouting about. It's forgiving at parking lot speeds, stable on the highway, and that classic single-cylinder soundtrack gives you all the cruiser character without needing a chiropractor afterwards. We hear from a lot of returning riders that the Meteor is the bike that finally convinced a hesitant partner to jump on the back too. The relaxed seating position, forgiving suspension, and mellow power delivery make it one of the more pillion-friendly options on this entire list, which matters if part of the appeal of getting back into riding is doing it together rather than solo. 11. Royal Enfield Classic 350. Just pipping the Meteor is the bike that arguably kicked off this whole Retro 350 revival in Australia. The Royal Enfield Classic 350, ride away from $6,490. The Classic 350 shares its engine and underpinnings with the Meteor and Hunter, but wraps them in that unmistakable teardrop tank, chrome detailing, and old-school single-dial speedo look that immediately reminds a lot of returning riders of the British bikes their fathers, uncles, or older brothers rode back in the 60s and 70s. There's a strong nostalgia pull here, and it's completely intentional. Underneath the retro looks it's a thoroughly modern, easy-to-ride machine, fuel-injected, with switches that fall easily to hand and a dashboard that doesn't overwhelm you with information you don't need. Simple, honest, unintimidating, and genuinely capable of a country backroad blat on the weekend. For a lot of Aussies rediscovering riding in their 50s and 60s, this is the bike that feels instantly familiar, even if they've never swung a leg over one before. It's also become something of a social phenomenon in its own right. Royal Enfield owners groups have popped up in nearly every Australian capital city, and a huge proportion of members skew older, riders who bought the Classic 350 specifically because it looked like something out of their childhood, then discovered a whole community of like-minded weekend riders waiting on the other side. For a lot of people, that social side of ownership turns out to be just as valuable as the bike itself. 10. Honda Seat 125. Cracking the top 10 is a bike with an almost cult-like following amongst older Australian riders, the Honda CT125, with a manufacturer's list price of $6,999, which typically lands somewhere around the $7,500 mark once you factor in registration and on-road costs. If the name doesn't ring a bell, the nickname will. This is the modern reincarnation of the legendary postie bike, the CT110 that delivered mail to virtually every letterbox in the country for decades. Honda took the underpinnings of the little Super Cub, gave it a taller stance, more suspension travel, a proper rear carry rack, and upswept bars, and the result is a bike that's genuinely unkillable, ridiculously easy to ride, and drips with nostalgia for anyone who grew up watching posties zip around suburban streets on the original. It's a semi-automatic 4-speed gearbox, meaning there's no clutch lever to worry about. You simply toe the gear lever up or down and the bike sorts the clutch out itself. That alone makes it one of the friendliest bikes on this entire list for a rider whose hands aren't quite what they were. Light, narrow, torquey down low, and genuinely capable of a gravel driveway or a dirt farm track if the mood strikes. It's the bike a lot of retirees buy purely because it makes them grin like a kid again. There's also the practical rear rack, a direct throwback to the postie bike design, which turns out to be genuinely handy for strapping down a small esky, a folding chair, or the morning paper and a loaf of bread from a local bakery. It's not flashy, it's not fast, but ask anyone who owns one and they'll tell you it's one of the most quietly satisfying bikes they've ever ridden. 9. Honda Super Cub C125. At number 9, we've got the CT125's more refined cousin, the Honda Super Cub C125, which arrived in Australia at a ride-away price of $6,099. The Super Cub needs almost no introduction globally. It's the single best-selling motorized vehicle in human history, with well over 100 million units built worldwide since 1958. Honda's Australian take on the modern C125 keeps everything that made the original special: that pressed steel step-through frame, the same semi-automatic clutchless gearbox as the CT125, a thickly padded seat, and an engine so gentle and fuel-efficient you'll be surprised how rarely you're at a servo. For older riders, the appeal is simple. There's no leg swing required, no clutch to modulate, no heavy machine to muscle around a car park. It's about as close to just get on and ride as motorcycling gets, wrapped in a package that looks like a piece of rolling history. A lot of blokes who rode Cubs or CT110s as teenagers are now buying Super Cubs in their 60s purely to relive it. And honestly, fair enough. Because Australia only received the C125 in genuinely limited numbers when it first launched locally, they've become something of a collector's item among enthusiasts, but the model has continued to evolve internationally with fresh colorways and minor updates each year. Even second-hand examples tend to hold their price surprisingly well, which is a nice bit of reassurance if you're weighing up whether to spend your retirement savings on one. 8. Honda CB300R. Coming in at number 8, and a genuine sleeper on this list, is the Honda CB300R, priced from around $6,649 before on-road costs. Where most of the bikes so far have leaned heavily into retro styling and low-stress cruising, the CB300R is Honda's modern, liquid-cooled naked bike, a proper street fighter shrunk down to a 287 cubic centimeters single-cylinder engine that's fully LAMS legal. It's noticeably lighter than most of its rivals in this category, with a low seat height and neutral, upright ergonomics that don't put strain on your wrists or lower back. Why does that matter for an older returning rider? Because it means confidence-inspiring handling without the physical demands of wrestling a heavier machine, combined with genuinely modern safety equipment like ABS as standard. It's not trying to be nostalgic. It's simply an easy, competent, well-built naked bike that happens to be perfect for someone who wants something a bit sportier than a cruiser but still forgiving enough to build confidence back up gradually. There's also the Honda reliability factor, which shouldn't be underestimated when you're rebuilding trust in your own riding after a long layoff. The last thing you want, easing back into traffic for the first time in decades, is to be second-guessing whether your bike is going to let you down. Honda's reputation for bulletproof engineering takes one enormous variable out of the equation, letting you focus purely on rebuilding your own skills and confidence. 7. Honda Monkey 125. At number 7, we've got one of the most cheerful little machines Honda's ever built, the Honda Monkey 125, which launched in Australia from $5,999 right away. The Monkey's tiny proportions can fool you into thinking it's a toy, but there's a very real reason it's found a devoted following among older riders. Its low seat height means literally anyone can flat-foot it at a standstill. Its lightweight makes it trivially easy to maneuver in and out of a garage or driveway, and its air-cooled 125 cubic centimeter single is about as unintimidating as engines get. USD forks and twin rear shocks give it a surprisingly planted, comfortable ride for something so small. There's also a psychological factor at play here that shouldn't be underestimated. For someone nervous about getting back into riding after a long break, a bike that looks fun rather than serious takes a lot of the pressure off. Nobody feels like they need to prove anything on a monkey. You just ride it round the block with a grin on your face, and that's exactly the point. Plenty of grandparents have discovered the monkey doubles beautifully as a family bonding tool too, small enough that grandkids get a kick out of sitting on it in the driveway, distinctive enough to draw a crowd at the local car meet, and cheap enough on fuel that a Sunday afternoon of pottering around the block barely dents the household budget. 6. CFMoto 300K. Sitting at number 6 is proof that budget-friendly doesn't have to mean basic. The CFMoto 300K, ride away from $5,990. CFMoto has built a genuine reputation in Australia over the past few years for offering gear-heavy, well-equipped bikes at prices that undercut the traditional Japanese and European brands significantly. The 300K is a naked, LAMS-approved machine with a comfortable, upright riding position, a light 292 cubic centimeters parallel twin engine, and standard ABS, features that would have been optional extras or simply unavailable on a budget bike a decade ago. For an older rider on a tighter retirement budget who still wants a modern, capable, naked-style motorcycle rather than a retro cruiser or a scooter, the 300K genuinely punches above its price tag. It's backed by a solid warranty too, which takes some of the risk out of buying a brand that's newer to the Australian market. It might not have 100 years of heritage behind it, but as a sensible, low-cost entry back into riding, it's hard to argue with the value. CFMoto's growth in Australia over the past few years has been notable enough that the brand now sits outside the official industry sales figures reported by the FCAI, simply because it isn't a member of that chamber, yet real-world sales numbers suggest it's shifting a genuinely significant volume of bikes. A lot of that volume is coming precisely from budget-conscious buyers who want equipment parity with the bigger names without paying the bigger name premium. 5. Honda PCX 125. Halfway down the list and we're back to scooters, because for a huge number of returning riders, an automatic scooter is genuinely the smartest way back onto two wheels. The Honda PCX 125 typically sells from around $4,499 plus on road costs, landing somewhere around the $5,400 mark right away. The PCX is Honda's flagship small-capacity scooter, and it shows. Idle-stop technology, a genuinely comfortable seat, decent underseat storage for your shopping or a spare jacket, and a smooth, refined 4-valve engine that sips fuel rather than guzzling it. Riders regularly report excellent fuel economy, which matters when you're on a fixed income and want your hobby to stay affordable rather than become a drain. There's no clutch, no gears, nothing complicated. Twist and go, squeeze both brakes to stop. For someone whose main goal is simply getting around town, popping down to see the grandkids, or nipping to the shops without dealing with car parks, the PCX 125 removes almost every barrier to entry that a traditional motorcycle presents. It's also worth noting the PCX sits in a bit of a sweet spot size-wise. It's substantial enough to feel stable and planted at highway on-ramp speeds, yet still light and narrow enough to filter through banked-up traffic without feeling like you're wrestling a full-size motorcycle. For a lot of retirees who still commute occasionally, or simply want one bike that can handle both the shopping run and the odd freeway stretch, that versatility is exactly why the PCX keeps turning up in driveways across the country. 4. Honda Bentley 110. At number 4, one of the most underrated commuter scooters on Australian roads, the Honda Bentley, ride-away pricing generally sitting between roughly $3,399 and $3,999 depending on current dealer offers. The Bentley is built with genuine practicality front and center. Honda originally designed this platform with commercial delivery riders in mind, which means it's engineered to be dead reliable, easy to maintain, and comfortable for hours at a time. That same reliability and comfort translates perfectly to an older rider who wants a scooter that simply works, day in and day out, without drama. It's light, nimble in traffic, has a genuinely low seat height, and because it was built to be ridden all day by delivery workers, the ergonomics are naturally forgiving on the back and wrists. It won't turn heads at the traffic lights, but it'll start every single time you press the button, which, if we are honest, matters a lot more once the novelty of a new bike wears off. There's a certain type of returning rider who genuinely couldn't care less about looking cool at the lights, and simply wants two wheels that get them from the driveway to the bowls club and back without any fuss whatsoever. The Bentley is built precisely for that person. It's unglamorous in the best possible way, a workhorse that just quietly does its job, week in and week out, for years on end. 3. Honda Dio 110. Coming in at 3 is one of the cheapest genuinely new scooters you can buy in this country, the Honda Dio 110, with right-away pricing around $3,499 to $3,599. Don't let the low price fool you into thinking it's a lesser machine. The Dio is narrow, light, noticeably lighter than the bigger PCX, and that makes it exceptionally easy to paddle around, park, and maneuver at walking pace, which is precisely where a lot of returning riders feel least confident. 14-inch wheels give it more stability over rough surfaces than some of its tiny-wheeled rivals, and the automatic transmission means there's nothing to think about beyond steering and braking. For a retiree who wants an affordable, genuinely low-risk way to get back into two-wheel transport, maybe for local errands, maybe just to relearn the feel of riding before stepping up to something bigger, the Dio 110 is about as unintimidating and wallet-friendly as it gets while still being a brand new bike with a full warranty behind it. Fuel economy is another quiet selling point here. Small-capacity automatic scooters like the Dio sip fuel so gently that a full tank can realistically last several weeks of typical local riding, which means the ongoing running costs are barely a rounding error on a retiree's budget. Combine that with cheap compulsory third-party insurance and low registration costs compared to a full-sized road bike, and the total cost of ownership becomes almost trivial. 2. Honda CB125e. At number 2, we've got the bike that a lot of Australian learners have started on for years, and it deserves far more attention from the older rider crowd than it currently gets. The Honda CB125e, priced from around $2,699 plus on road costs. This is about as basic, honest, and unbreakable a motorcycle as Honda makes. No frills, no digital dash, no ride modes, just a simple, carburetor-inspired 125 cubic centimeter single, a manual gearbox, drum, or basic disc brakes, and a genuinely low seat height. It's the kind of bike where nothing can really go wrong, because there's barely anything to go wrong with. For an older rider easing back into using a clutch and gears after decades away, the CB125e is a brilliant retraining tool. It's forgiving of a clumsy clutch release, light enough to muscle around if you drop it in the driveway, and cheap enough that if riding turns out not to be for you after all, you haven't sunk your retirement savings into finding out. Plenty of experienced riders keep one of these in the shed purely as a runabout, and there's real wisdom in that. A lot of rider training schools around Australia actually use the CB125e, or bikes extremely similar to it, as their standard training platform, which means if you're planning to do a license refresher course before jumping back on the road, there's a decent chance you'll already be intimately familiar with exactly how this bike behaves before you even buy one. That familiarity alone removes a big chunk of the anxiety that comes with buying your first bike back after a long break. 1. Honda NAVi. And at number 1, the cheapest genuinely new motorized two-wheeler you can buy in Australia today, the Honda NAVi, with right-away pricing as low as roughly $2,472 to $2,499. The NAVi is a strange little thing to look at, part scooter, part mini motorcycle, with exposed frame elements that give it a rugged, almost dirt bike-adjacent look. But underneath the styling, it's dead simple. A 109 cubic centimeters automatic CVT engine, twist-and-go operation, a genuinely tiny seat height that almost anyone can flatfoot, and a lockable 17. 5-litre storage box under the seat big enough for a decent shop. Why does it top the list? Because it removes literally every barrier that stops an older Australian from getting back on the road. It's cheaper than most second-hand push bikes with electric assist. It's automatic, so there's no clutch or gearbox to relearn. It's tiny and light enough that dropping it, or simply parking it in a tight spot, is never a source of anxiety. And because it's brand new with a full Honda warranty, there's none of the uncertainty that comes with buying a decades-old second-hand bike off Gumtree. For a lot of retirees, the NAVi isn't a serious motorcycle, and that's exactly why it works. It's also become something of a quiet phenomenon among carers and family members shopping for an aging parent's first bit of independent transport since giving up driving. At this price point, buying one isn't really a financial decision at all. It's closer to buying a decent second-hand push bike, except this one comes with an engine, a warranty, and the ability to keep up with suburban traffic. Before we wrap up, it's worth taking a moment on something just as important as which bike you choose, and that's how you ease back into riding responsibly. If it's been 10, 20, or even 30 years since you last rode, your body simply isn't going to react the way it did back then, and there's no shame whatsoever in acknowledging that. A refresher course through an accredited rider training provider is genuinely one of the smartest investments you can make before buying any of the bikes on this list. Most states run dedicated returning rider courses specifically aimed at exactly this situation, focused on rebuilding low-speed control, braking technique, and has a perception in a controlled, judgment-free environment before you're back out mixing it with peak hour traffic. It's also worth being upfront with yourself about gear. A properly fitted helmet, a decent jacket with armor, and gloves aren't optional extras. They're every bit as essential on a little 110 cubic centimeter scooter as they are on a big adventure bike, because the bitumen doesn't care how many cubic centimeters you are riding when you meet it. Buy the best gear your budget allows, because it's the one purchase on this entire list you genuinely hope you never have to rely on. So there you have it, 15 genuinely cheap, genuinely capable motorcycles and scooters that Australian seniors have quietly been snapping up, while the rest of the motorcycle media stays fixated on the latest 1000cc superbike. And it makes sense when you look at the bigger picture. Industry figures show scooters were one of the only growth categories in the Australian motorcycle market recently, even as overall new bike sales softened. With something like 1 in 10 Australians already holding a license, there's a massive pool of lapsed and returning riders out there, and manufacturers are slowly waking up to it. If you're one of those people, license in the drawer, memories of riding decades ago, wondering whether it's worth getting back into it, hopefully this list has shown you there's a bike out there that won't break the bank and won't break your back either. If you enjoyed this one, smash that like button, subscribe if you're new around here, and drop a comment telling us which of these 15 you reckon you'd actually buy, or if you've already got one sitting in your garage. Until next time, ride safe, ride smart, and we'll see you on the next video.